In the glamorous world of Beverly Hills high society, Maria Santos was just another invisible shadow among the rich and powerful. As a housekeeper at the mansion of magnate Richard Hamilton, she witnessed daily the opulence and secrets of California's elite, always staying discreet and silent. But when a grand charity gala is organized to celebrate a special occasion, Maria accidentally overhears a phone conversation that sends her into total panic. Someone is planning to kill her employer during the event, using a rare wine as a deadly weapon. Now, a simple cleaning woman must find the courage to confront 250 influential people who see her as invisible, risking everything to save the life of a man who may not believe her. On a night where appearances deceive and loyalties are tested, Maria will discover that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones the world chooses to ignore.
Hello. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. At the end, please rate the story. I will be happy to respond to you in the comments. Now, let's get to the story.
The gentle breeze of the California night whispered through the perfectly aligned cypress trees that stood like silent sentinels guarding the Hamilton mansion. Richard Hamilton's estate rose majestically against the starry Beverly Hills sky, its French glass windows pouring golden light over impeccably maintained gardens. The subtle sound of elegant conversations and the soft clinking of crystal glasses drifted through the night, blending with the distant murmur of Sunset Boulevard traffic. Richard Hamilton adjusted the cuffs of his Italian silk shirt, watching through the panoramic window of his second-floor office. At 52, he had built a tech empire that turned algorithms into billions of dollars. His company, Hamiltech Solutions, had revolutionized artificial intelligence for the corporate market, and tonight was not just a celebration of his success, but also his commitment to philanthropy. The charity event was set to raise funds for educational programs in underserved Los Angeles communities. "Mr. Hamilton, the guests are arriving," murmured his personal assistant, James, appearing discreetly at the office door. The younger man's voice carried that calculated reverence Richard had learned to recognize after years navigating high society circles. Richard nodded, running a hand through his perfectly styled gray hair. He could feel the weight of responsibility not just as host, but as one of the West Coast's most influential businessmen. Tonight, 250 of the most powerful names from Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and Wall Street would gather under his roof. Downstairs, the grand main hall had been transformed into a palace of dreams. 3 enormous baccarat crystal chandeliers hung from the 13-foot ceiling, each weighing more than a luxury car and radiating light like captured constellations. The Italian marble walls displayed original paintings by Monet and Picasso, while arrangements of rare orchids, each costing more than many people's monthly salaries, adorned polished mahogany tables. Guests glided through the hall like characters from a period film. Women draped in haute couture, Valentino, Chanel, Dior, wore jewelry that sparkled like little suns trapped in diamonds and emeralds. Men donned perfectly tailored tuxedos, their Patek Philippe and Rolex watches shining discreetly under the golden light. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and the bouquet of French wines that cost more than whole cars. Amid all this splendor, Maria Santos moved like an efficient, invisible shadow. At 45, she possessed a quiet beauty, refined, not diminished, by years of hard work. Her deep, observant brown eyes and natural dignity in movement spoke of a resilience no hardship had erased. Dressed in her impeccable uniform, a white blouse and black skirt, she carried a small silver broom and a cloth, checking every surface, every detail. Maria had worked for the Hamilton family for 3 years, long enough to know every corner of the 15-bedroom mansion. She knew the entry hall table needed polishing every 30 minutes because of fingerprints from glasses, that orchid petals would silently fall onto the marble when no one was looking, and that Mr. Hamilton liked the crystal ashtrays cleaned immediately after each use. She stopped near a wall, watching a small group of socialites laughing too loudly, spilling drops of Dom Perignon champagne on the Persian carpet. Without hesitation, Maria quietly approached, knelt, and began to soak up the liquid with meticulous care. The women continued talking as if she were part of the furniture, their voices loud, filled with affectation. "Did you see the Morrisons' new yacht? They say it cost $20 million, commented a middle-aged blonde, her diamonds glittering so brightly they nearly outshone the chandeliers above. "Only 20? How economical," replied another with a crystal-clear, hollow laugh. Ours cost 32 and was worth every penny. Maria finished cleaning in silence, standing up and moving away without any of the women even noticing her. She'd learned long ago that to these people, she was as invisible as the air they breathed. That didn't bother her. It actually gave her a unique perspective on the world they inhabited. Walking through the gourmet kitchen, Maria checked that the canapés were being served at the correct temperature and the uniformly dressed waiters were properly replenishing the champagne trays. The French chef, Monsieur Dubois, waved at her with a genuine smile, one of the few staff members who always treated her with respect. "Maria, ma chérie, could you check if we need more napkins in the dining room?" he asked in his heavily accented English. "The guests are, how do you say, very enthusiastic about the food." She nodded, feeling a genuine warmth for his consideration. "Of course, Monsieur Dubois, I'll check right away." As she headed to the dining room, Maria passed Senator William Bradford and his wife, who were chatting animatedly with a group of Hollywood executives. Their voices were loud and confident, discussing multimillion-dollar deals as if they were routine transactions. "The new regulation will benefit our sector," the senator said, gesturing with his glass of 50-year-old Scotch whiskey. "I'm sure Richard will be pleased with the results." Maria walked past them, her footsteps silent on the carpet, noting how they didn't even register her presence. To them, she was just another piece of expensive decor that made the night perfect. The center of the main hall. Richard Hamilton descended the marble staircase with measured, confident steps. His Armani tuxedo fit perfectly over a still athletic frame, the result of years of personal trainers and a strictly controlled diet. His blue eyes scanned the crowd with the satisfaction of a man who had built all this with his own hands and intellect. He discreetly greeted some of the most important guests: the CEO of the largest Hollywood studio, the president of one of the country's biggest philanthropic foundations, and the mayor of Los Angeles. Each handshake was calculated, each smile measured to send exactly the right impression. Maria, quietly adjusting some flowers that had been moved, watched Richard approach the small makeshift stage in the center of the hall. He had a presence that commanded attention effortlessly, the confidence that only true success could provide. In her 3 years working for him, she had learned to recognize his moods, his preferences, his little rituals. The crowd's murmur gradually faded as Richard stepped to the microphone. Conversations stopped, glasses paused midair, and all eyes turned to the host. Even the waiters slowed their pace, becoming even more discreet in their movements. Maria positioned herself near a side wall, where she could watch both Richard and the guests, ready to act should any detail need her attention. She held the cloth gently in her hands, her eyes alert and professional, but there was something more in her gaze, a genuine curiosity about the man she had served for so long, yet who remained a mystery to her. Richard cleared his throat quietly, his eyes sweeping over the expectant faces. The silence in the room was almost tangible, heavy with anticipation and respect. It was time to officially begin the evening, to turn this gathering of power and influence into something that, at least in theory, served a higher purpose. That he took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility and opportunity, and prepared to speak to the people who represented the pinnacle of American society. Unaware that, in just a few hours, his life would be completely transformed by someone they all considered utterly invisible. Maria knelt quietly beside the side table, polishing a nearly invisible stain with precise circular motions that only her trained eyes had spotted. The Italian marble gleamed under the golden light, reflecting the jewelry of women passing just inches away, their conversations flowing as if she were part of the expensive furniture adorning the room. "Darling, you have to see my new acquisition," exclaimed Victoria Ashford, one of Beverly Hills' most influential socialites, extending her wrist adorned with a diamond bracelet to her friend. "Cartier limited edition. Only 12 made in the whole world." "Absolutely stunning," replied Eleanor Blackwood, wife of the real estate magnate, her voice thick with barely concealed envy. "That must have cost a fortune." Maria continued her meticulous work, her ears catching every word as the two women positioned themselves right beside her. She could sense the expensive scent of French perfumes, the whispering texture of silk against silk as the dresses swayed. Her hard-working hands starkly contrasted with the perfectly manicured hands gesturing just inches from her head. Only 250,000, Victoria said with false modesty. Really an investment. The value will only go up. Eleanor let out a crystalline laugh. What a bargain. I spent more than that just on flowers for my daughter's wedding last month. Maria finished polishing the table and stood slowly, her joints protesting after hours of continuous work. She started to move away when Eleanor stepped back, bumping into her without even looking. Watch it, Eleanor muttered irritably, as if Maria were an inconvenient obstacle, not a person. She didn't even turn her head, continuing her conversation as if nothing had happened. Maria murmured a silent apology and kept going, feeling that familiar sense of invisibility that always accompanied her in these moments. It wasn't new. After 3 years working for the Hamilton family, she had learned to navigate this world where her presence was simultaneously essential and ignored. She headed toward the buffet table, where sterling silver platters displayed delicacies that cost more per serving than her weekly paycheck. Beluga caviar, Maine lobster, freshly shaved white truffles. Everything arranged with artistic precision. Maria discreetly checked that dishes were being properly replenished and that no crumbs or spills threatened the flawless presentation. A group of executives approached, their voices loud and confident, discussing billion-dollar mergers. Maria kept arranging the dishes as they helped themselves, speaking over her as if she were transparent. The Technova acquisition will give us total dominance of the Asian market, said a stocky man with a Rolex flashing under the lights. Richard really knows how to pick his investments. He's got the Midas touch, agreed another, pouring champagne into his glass. Everything he touches turns to gold. Maria noticed a drop of champagne run down the side of the glass and fall onto the white linen tablecloth. She patiently waited for the man to step away before carefully cleaning the spot, restoring the table's immaculate perfection as she worked. Her thoughts turned to Sophia, her 16-year-old daughter, probably studying for her chemistry exam right now at the small kitchen table in their modest East LA apartment. The image sharply contrasted with the luxury surrounding her here. Sophia bent over borrowed library books, lit by the dim lamp Maria had bought on sale at the local market. Mom, one day I'm going to be a doctor, Sophia had declared just last week, her brown eyes shining with determination. I'll work hard, get a scholarship, and then I can take care of you like you take care of me. Maria had smiled, her heart filling with equal parts pride and worry. She worked 16 hours a day, 8 at the Hamilton mansion and another 8 cleaning downtown offices, to pay the $600 rent and Sophia's schoolbooks. Every penny saved was carefully set aside for her daughter's education. A loud crash of crystal snapped her back to the present. Near the window, a young socialite had dropped a glass of red wine on the Persian rug. The red stains spread like blood over the golden silk, and the woman stood frozen, staring in horror at the damage. "Oh my God," she whispered, cheeks flushing. "I can't believe I did this." Maria immediately approached, pulling an emergency kit from her apron, the one she always carried, absorbent cloths, special stain removers, and a small soft bristle brush. She knelt beside the stain, starting to work with precise, efficient motions. "Don't worry," she said softly to the young woman, her first words directed at a guest all night. "It will come right out." The socialite looked at her in surprise, as if noticing her for the first time. You can clean this?" "Yes, ma'am," Maria replied, gently applying the solution to the stain. "This rug is 18th century, but I've seen worse. The key is to act fast." The young woman watched fascinated as Maria worked, turning what seemed like an irreversible disaster into a memory soon forgotten. Within minutes, there was no trace of the stain. "Incredible," the socialite murmured, though her attention was quickly drawn away by a friend approaching, and she left without even a thank you. Maria packed up her tools, accustomed to this dynamic. She had long ago learned that her role was not to be recognized, but to make these people's lives easier and more beautiful. There was a dignity in this work she fully embraced. Her keen observational skills, sharpened over years of invisibility, caught details others missed. She noticed Senator Bradford drinking more than usual, his flushed face suggesting he was trying to drown some worry. She saw the Hollywood producer's wife looking tense, her eyes constantly scanning the crowd. She watched Richard greet each guest with calculated precision, though there was a stiffness in his shoulders that hinted at some invisible burden. Unlike his guests, Richard had always treated her with basic courtesy. He knew her name, occasionally asked about Sophia, and always said, "Please" and "thank you" when requesting something. He wasn't effusive or particularly warm, but there was a fundamental decency Maria deeply respected. She remembered an incident 6 months earlier when she had caught a severe flu but tried to work anyway. Richard found her trembling as she cleaned the downstairs bathroom. "Maria, you should be home," he said with genuine concern. "Go rest. I'll cover your sick days." It had been a simple gesture, but it touched her deeply. In a world where she was often treated like she was invisible, that moment of basic humanity meant more than any bonus or expensive gift. Maria started toward the kitchen to check if the waitstaff needed more clean dishes when she heard Richard's voice rise above the crowd's murmur. She paused, listening closely to his words. "My dear friends," Richard was saying, his voice carrying that natural authority that commanded immediate attention. "Tonight is special for many reasons. Not only are we united by a noble cause, but we are also celebrating extraordinary moments in our lives." Maria positioned herself near the kitchen entrance, from where she could see Richard at the center of the room. He held a glass of champagne, but there was something in his stance suggesting his words were heading towards something more meaningful. "Soon," Richard continued, his smile broadening, "I would like to propose a very special toast. Our sommelier has prepared a unique surprise for this evening. A 1947 Chateau d'Yquem, one of the rarest vintages in the world. Only 16 bottles still exist, and I was fortunate enough to acquire one for this memorable occasion." A murmur of admiration ran through the crowd. Maria knew little about expensive wines, but she could tell by the guests' reactions that Richard was talking about something truly extraordinary. "This wine," Richard went on, "represents not only excellence and rarity, but also the kind of moment that deserves to be celebrated with the right people. So, in about an hour, after we have all enjoyed Chef Dubois' amazing food, we will share this treasure together." Maria watched Richard's eyes sparkle with anticipation, feeling a growing curiosity about what made this night so special for him. There was something in his expression, a mix of nervousness and expectation, that suggested the rare wine was only the prelude to something even more significant as polite applause echoed through the room and conversations resumed with new energy. Maria continued her silent work, her eyes sharp and her mind processing every detail. She didn't yet know that, in less than an hour, she, the invisible woman they barely noticed, would hold in her hands the fate of everyone at the Hamilton mansion. The solid oak door to Richard's private office opened silently under Maria's gentle touch. The secluded room stood in stark contrast to the ostentatious luxury displayed throughout the rest of the mansion. Here, everything breathed discreet power and elegant functionality. Mahogany shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with first editions and volumes on technology and business strategy. The massive Brazilian hardwood desk was covered with organized folders and documents. Seemingly waiting for Richard's attention the next day, Maria entered with her characteristic steps, silent and efficient. Even during the grandest parties, Richard insisted that his personal sanctuary remain immaculate. She started with the bookshelf, carefully wiping each shelf to remove the barely noticeable dust that had accumulated since her last cleaning 2 days ago. The muffled sounds from the party downstairs reached the room like a distant murmur, punctuated only by the occasional burst of loud laughter or the clinking of crystal. Maria always found the contrast fascinating. How Richard's real life existed in this quiet, orderly space, while downstairs he played the part of a magnanimous host to an audience more interested in connections than in him as a person. She approached the desk, where some documents had been left slightly disorganized. That wasn't typical of Richard. He was obsessively meticulous about keeping his workspace in order. Maria began straightening the folders when her hand accidentally bumped the edge of a leather document holder. The heavy material thudding against the desk was muffled by the thick carpet but loud enough to make Maria freeze for a moment. Papers scattered across the polished surface. Contracts, financial reports, and some sheets with numbers she couldn't fully understand. She immediately began reorganizing everything, her hands working with the precision of someone familiar with every detail of Richard's filing system. Then, A low, urgent voice cut through the silence from the slightly ajar door. Maria stopped, still holding some documents, trying to locate the source. Apparently, someone had entered the small adjoining office, a space Richard used for private phone calls during social events. "Yes, everything is ready?" the voice murmured, muffled but still audible. "There can be no mistakes this time." A chill ran down Maria's spine. There was something in that voice's intensity that made her instinctively move closer to the door, her footsteps silent over the Persian rug. It wasn't ordinary curiosity. There was urgency, tension, warning her that something was wrong. "The wine arrived this morning," the voice continued, and Maria felt her heart start to race. "Chateau d'Yquem, 1947. Just as you requested. No one will suspect a thing." Maria pressed her ear lightly against the door crack, her hands trembling slightly. The voice was familiar, but she couldn't immediately place who it belonged to. It was someone who knew the intimate details of the party, someone aware of the special wine Richard had announced minutes before. "Yes, I understand the importance of timing," the person went on. "When he gives the toast, it will seem completely natural. A man his age, with the stress of business. Everyone will accept it as a heart attack." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. She stepped away from the door, her breathing quick and shallow. Heart attack. The special wine. There was no doubt about what she had heard. Someone was planning to kill Richard Hamilton that very night, during the party, in front of all the city's most important guests. "There will be no autopsy," the voice continued with cold calculation. "Not when everyone sees him collapse naturally after drinking the wine. And even if there were one, the substance we're using is almost undetectable after a few hours." Maria leaned against the wall, her legs trembling. Her first instinct was to run. Leave that room, return to the party, and try to forget what she'd heard. But the words kept echoing in her mind. "It will seem completely natural. Heart attack." Who would believe her? She was just a cleaner, an invisible woman who cleaned the homes of the rich. If she tried to tell anyone, who would take her word over that of whoever was on the phone? Certainly someone important, someone with access to the party's most intimate details. But then her mind turned to Richard, the man who always treated her with basic decency, who cared about her health when she was sick, who paid for her sick days without hesitation. He was not just her employer. He was one of the few people in that world who acknowledged her as a human being. "Everything has to happen during the toast." The voice interrupted her thoughts. "He'll want to give a speech, something about new beginnings or big changes. Ironic, isn't it?" Maria felt a wave of nausea. Whoever was on the phone knew Richard well enough to predict his habits, his tendencies. That meant the betrayal was coming from inside his inner circle. "Yes, I know what's at stake," the person said, voice growing impatient. "Billions of dollars aren't a joke. But after tonight, all of it will be ours." Maria closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath. She needed to think clearly, to find a way to warn Richard without putting herself in danger. But how? If she simply went to him and told him what she'd heard, he might not believe her. Worse, if the traitor found out she knew. "I have to hang up now," the voice said suddenly. "They'll notice my absence. Remember, once he raises his glass for the toast, it's just a matter of minutes." Maria heard the phone click off, followed by the sound of a chair moving. Pure panic surged through her nervous system as she realized footsteps were approaching the door. There was no time to return to the desk, no time to pretend she was cleaning as usual. Desperate, she looked around the office for a place to hide. Her options were limited. The room was spacious but offered little cover. She threw herself behind Richard's leather armchair, crouching in the narrow space between the chair and the bookshelf. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared it might be audible. She could hear her own breath, rapid and uneven, and forced herself to control it. Through the small gap between the chair and desk, she could see the office door. The footsteps stopped, hesitated, then the door swung wide open. Maria saw elegant feet in Italian leather shoes enter the room. The person paused near the desk, apparently checking if everything was in order. Maria held her breath, muscles tense from the uncomfortable position. She could smell the expensive perfume, hear the controlled breathing of someone who had just finished a conversation that could change many lives. For a dreadful moment, the footsteps moved straight toward her. Maria closed her eyes, waiting to be discovered, imagining what would happen if the person realized someone had overheard the phone call. But then the footsteps stopped, stayed still for several eternal seconds, and finally retreated toward the door. She heard the door close softly, followed by the sound of footsteps fading down the hall. Still, Maria remained motionless for several minutes, her body trembling with tension and fear. When she finally convinced herself she was alone, she rose slowly, her joints protesting the uncomfortable position. Maria edged toward the door and opened it just enough to check that the hallway was empty. She needed to leave that room, return to the party, and try to find out who had made that call. But above all, she needed to find a way to save Richard Hamilton. Even if it meant risking everything she had built for herself and for Sophia. As she walked quietly back to the corridor, one question kept hammering in her mind. Who, among all those smiling, elegant people downstairs, was planning to commit a murder in front of 250 of the most powerful people in America? And how could she, a simple cleaner, stop it from happening? Maria left the office with legs that felt like they were made of cotton, each step a battle against the trembling that ran through her entire body. The hallway she had walked down thousands of times now seemed strange, the shadows deeper, the sounds of the party below more distant and unreal. She leaned against the cold marble wall, closing her eyes and trying to steady the short, uneven bursts of her breathing. "This can't be happening," she whispered to herself, her words barely audible. "I must have misunderstood. It has to be some kind of cruel joke, or maybe I overheard a conversation about a movie, a project." But even as she tried to convince herself, the words echoed with terrible clarity in her mind. "It will seem completely natural. Heart attack. As soon as he raises the glass for the toast." There was no way to reinterpret that. No way to turn those words into something harmless. Maria began to walk down the hallway, her steps automatic while her mind worked frantically. Who would want to harm Richard? He was a successful businessman, certainly had competitors, maybe even enemies, but murder? And during a charity party in front of 250 people. The logistics of the situation hit her like a cold wave. Whoever was on the phone had intimate access to the house, knew the details of the party, was aware of the special wine Richard had ordered. That meant it was someone close, someone Richard trusted. The betrayal was even more shocking than the crime itself. She stopped at the top of the marble staircase, looking down into the main hall where the party went on in all its splendor. Crystal lights created a golden kaleidoscope over expensive dresses and sparkling jewels. The sound of conversations, laughter, and the soft music from the string quartet all seemed grotesquely normal given what she knew. "Who's going to believe me?" she thought, watching the important guests mingle in the hall. "I'm just the cleaning lady. If I go to Richard and tell him this crazy story, he'll think I'm crazy. And if the killer finds out I know..." The thought made her shudder. If that person was willing to kill Richard Hamilton, they certainly wouldn't hesitate to silence an inconvenient witness. And Maria had Sophia to think about. Her daughter depended on her, dreamed of becoming a doctor, trusted that her mother would always be there to support her. But then the image of Richard appeared in her mind. Not the public Richard, the powerful magnate commanding respect and admiration, but the private Richard she knew. The man who always said good morning when he got home, who asked about Sophia when she mentioned her daughter was studying extra hard, who had paid for her sick days without hesitation. "I can't let this happen," she murmured, feeling a growing determination replace the paralyzing fear. "I can't just stand here while a decent man is murdered." Maria slowly went down the stairs, forcing herself to adopt her usual professional posture. She grabbed her cleaning cart, which she had discreetly left near the kitchen entrance, and began moving through the party with renewed purpose. This time, however, she wasn't just cleaning. She was investigating. Her eyes scanned the crowd, trying to recognize faces, watching for any suspicious behavior. Who had been away long enough to make that call? Who knew the details about the special wine? Who would have a motive to want Richard dead? She noticed Senator Bradford, his flushed face suggesting he'd been drinking more than usual. Could political problems lead to something so extreme? She spotted Eleanor Blackwood, the real estate magnate's wife, looking nervous and constantly checking her phone. And there were at least a dozen executives and investors who could benefit from Richard's death. Maria headed toward the bar area near the French doors that opened to the garden. She started wiping down the tall tables where guests left their glasses, but her ears stayed tuned to the conversations. "The Asian market is a gold mine," said a middle-aged man to his group, "but Richard is monopolizing the best contracts. Some of us are being completely shut out." "He's always been ruthless in business," replied an elegant woman, "but lately he seems even more aggressive. I heard he's planning a massive expansion that will eliminate practically all competition." Maria kept cleaning, absorbing each fragment of information. Economic motives certainly existed, but murder seemed like an extreme step. She moved to another area, always keeping her cleaning tasks as a cover. That's when she approached the area near the kitchen and saw something that made her blood run cold. Through the glass door separating the main hall from the service area, she could see the hallway leading to the climate-controlled wine cellar where Richard stored his rare wine collection. A familiar figure emerged from that hallway, moving with discreet haste. Maria recognized the posture, the way of walking, the profile she had seen thousands of times. It was someone she knew, someone who frequented the house regularly, someone Richard trusted. Her heart raced as the realization hit her. She had found her suspect. The person quickly checked that no one was watching, then composed themselves and returned to the main hall with a casual smile. Maria watched, fascinated and horrified, at how easily the mask of normality fit the face that minutes before showed tension and urgency. "My God," she thought. "How can someone smile and talk normally knowing they're about to?" She couldn't finish the thought. The reality of what she was witnessing was too big to fully process. But now she was certain. There was no doubt who had made that phone call. Maria forced herself to continue her duties, but her eyes discreetly followed the suspect throughout the party. She watched how this person greeted other guests, laughed at jokes, and seemed completely at ease. The coldness needed to maintain such a facade while planning a murder made her shuddered as the night wore on. Maria felt the tension grow like a rope stretched to the breaking point. She checked the large grandfather clock in the main hall. It was past 10 o'clock. How much longer until Richard made the fatal toast? She tried to get close to where the special wine was being prepared, but there were too many waiters and catering staff moving around. It would be impossible to do anything without being noticed. Besides, she wasn't sure how the lethal substance had been introduced into the wine. It could have been done days ago during preparation, or maybe right at the last minute. Maria headed for the restrooms, where she could have a few minutes to think clearly. She looked in the ornate mirror, seeing her own pale, tense face reflected back. Her hands trembled slightly, and she could see the fear in her own eyes. "I have to do something," she whispered to her reflection. "But what? How can I stop this without proof? How can I convince Richard without sounding like a lunatic?" She left the bathroom determined to find a solution, but was interrupted by Richard's voice echoing through the discreet sound system installed for the party. "My dear friends," the familiar and authoritative voice cut through the murmur of conversations. "I'd like to ask for your attention for just a few moments." Maria felt her stomach tighten. She hurried back to the main hall, where she saw Richard standing near the marble staircase, holding a wireless microphone. His presence commanded immediate attention. The conversation stopped, heads turned, and all the glasses were lowered. "This evening has truly been special," Richard continued, his smile warm and genuine. "Not only because of the generosity you've all shown to our charitable cause, but also for the privilege of sharing this moment with such important people in my life." Maria took a position where she could see both Richard and the person she now knew was the killer. Her eyes nervously shifted between the two, looking for any sign, any chance to intervene. "As promised earlier," Richard went on, "it's time to share something truly extraordinary. Our sommelier has prepared a unique surprise. The Chateau d'Yquem 1947, one of the rarest wines in the world." Maria saw some waiters position themselves strategically around the room, carrying trays with glasses that gleamed like amber liquid under the crystal lights. Her heart beat so loudly she feared others might hear it. "I'd like to make this special toast in just a few minutes," Richard announced, his voice full of anticipation. "So please, get ready for a moment that will surely remain in our memories forever." The innocent words gained a sinister meaning in Maria's mind. She watched the suspect in the crowd, seeing how this person positioned themselves with a clear view of Richard, how their eyes shone with anticipation that had nothing to do with celebration. The clock was ticking, and Maria knew she had only minutes left to figure out how to save Richard Hamilton's life. The main hall had transformed into an improvised amphitheater, with all the guests forming an elegant semicircle around the ornate table where the Chateau d'Yquem 1947 rested in its polished silver bucket. The ice around the bottle created tiny droplets of condensation that trickled down the side, reflecting the golden light from the chandeliers like liquid diamonds. Maria stood near the wall, her presence invisible among the waiters and catering staff who were also watching the historic moment. Her hands gripped the cleaning cloth so tightly her knuckles turned white, and she could feel cold sweat running down her forehead despite the pleasant temperature in the room. Richard approached the table with the grace and confidence of someone used to being the center of attention. He had removed the jacket of his tuxedo, revealing the impeccably pressed white shirt and silk suspenders that Maria had carefully arranged in his closet that morning. The contrast between the everyday normalcy of that memory and the current situation sent a wave of nausea through her stomach. "My dear friends," Richard said, his voice naturally projecting through the perfect acoustics of the hall. "Before opening this rarity, I would like to share a bit of its history." Maria saw discreet cameras being positioned, 2 professional photographers documenting the event, plus at least a dozen guests with smartphones ready to capture the moment. The terrible irony of the situation hit her. If her fear came true, there would be photographic evidence of Richard Hamilton's murder. "This wine was bottled in 1947, Richard continued, carefully picking up the dark bottle. "That means it is older than most of us here today. It survived wars, economic shifts, social transformations. It is literally a piece of history that we can taste." The crowd murmured their appreciation. Smiling faces turned toward Richard with the respectful attention reserved for special moments. Maria scanned the assembly with her eyes, quickly locating the person she knew was the assassin. Strategically positioned with a clear view of Richard, their face composed in a polite expression that revealed nothing of the phone conversation Maria had overheard. "As you can see," Richard raised the bottle slightly, "the label shows signs of age, but that only adds authenticity to the experience. We are sharing not just a wine, but a moment that connects our generation with those who came before." Maria felt her legs tremble. Every word Richard spoke, every casual gesture, every genuine smile he gave the guests, all became more tragic knowing what was about to happen. She watched how reverently he held the bottle, how his eyes shone with genuine pleasure in sharing something clearly meaningful to him. "Now, my sommelier has informed me that we should serve this treasure in small portions," Richard said, beginning to carefully remove the bottle's seal. "Not due to a lack of generosity, but because every sip should be savored and appreciated." The waiters positioned themselves with trays of crystal glasses, each polished to sparkle like diamonds. Maria saw the golden liquid waiting in the glasses to be poured. Her mind raced desperately, trying to find some way to intervene without causing panic or sounding completely insane. "What do I say?" she thought in despair. "How do I explain that I overheard a murder plot? How do I make these people believe me?" She imagined the crowd's reaction if she simply shouted, "Don't drink! It's poison!" Nervous laughter, condescending looks, maybe even calling security to remove the disturbed janitor. Richard would be embarrassed, his reputation stained by the behavior of an employee apparently having a mental breakdown. "I'd lose my job immediately," she realized, the practicality cutting through the panic. "Not just here, but Richard would surely make sure I never worked for anyone in his circle again. And how would I explain to Sophia why we lost our financial stability?" But then she looked at Richard again, seeing how he handled the bottle with almost paternal care, how he smiled at the guests with genuine affection. This was the man who asked about Sophia's recovery when she had pneumonia. The man who quietly increased her Christmas bonus when he noticed she had been wearing the same patched uniform for months. "He's going to die," she thought, the raw reality cutting through all her practical concerns. In a few minutes, he will be dead, and I will be the only person in this room who could have stopped it. Richard began tilting the bottle over the first glass, the golden liquid flowing in a constant, elegant stream. The sound was almost hypnotic, a liquid whisper that seemed too loud in the respectful silence of the crowd. "Look at the color," Richard remarked, raising the first glass for everyone to see. "It's like liquid amber, with highlights that uniquely capture the light. The aroma?" He paused to inhale delicately, and Maria saw the person she knew as the assassin lean forward slightly, eyes fixed on Richard's face with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. "The aroma is complex," Richard continued, "with notes of honey, dried fruits, and something that can only be described as eternity." Maria felt tears stinging her eyes. The genuine passion in Richard's voice, the way he shared his joy with others, the complete innocence with which he approached his own death. It was all too much to bear. "Now," Richard said, placing the second glass, "we will serve everyone so we can make our toast together." The sound of wine being poured continued, each glass filled with careful precision. Maria saw other people in the crowd smiling in anticipation, some whispering about the rarity of the experience, others gently raising their empty glasses in preparation. "He's going to make the toast," she thought, recalling the words from the phone conversation. "Once he raises his glass, it's just a matter of minutes." She watched the person she knew as the assassin, seeing how they discreetly checked an expensive watch, how their eyes moved calculatingly between Richard and the glasses being served. There was something in their body language, a tension, a predatory anticipation that brutally contrasted with the celebratory atmosphere. "I can't let this happen," Maria murmured to herself, so low she could barely hear. "No matter the cost, no matter if they don't believe me, no matter if I lose everything." Richard was on the 8th glass now, each movement deliberate and graceful. Maria could see he was savoring the moment, appreciating not just the wine but the company, the atmosphere, the joy of sharing something special with important people in his life. "Almost done," Richard announced, pouring the 10th glass. "I hope everyone appreciates this unique opportunity." The crowd murmured their approval, some spontaneous applause echoing through the hall. Maria saw waiters distributing the served glasses, each guest receiving their small liquid treasure with appropriate reverence. "My last chance," she thought, her breathing growing shallow. "If I don't act now, in a few minutes it will be too late." She imagined living with the guilt for the rest of her life, facing Sophia every night, knowing she'd chosen her own safety over the life of a decent man, reading in the newspapers about Richard Hamilton's natural death, knowing she could have prevented it. "All right," Richard said, finishing pouring the last glass and raising the empty bottle for all to see. "Now let's make a toast that—" "No!" The word exploded from Maria's lips before she could stop herself. But the sound was lost in the crowd's murmur, no one hearing it but herself. Richard began lifting his own glass, the golden liquid catching the crystal lamp light. His expression was one of pure pleasure, a man genuinely happy to share something special with people he valued. Maria felt time slow around her. She could see every detail with terrible clarity. Richard's relaxed smile, the glasses sparkling in the guest's hands, the predatory look of the person she knew as the assassin, the cameras poised to capture the fatal moment. "Now or never," she thought, feeling a strange calm settle over her. "No matter what happens to me, no matter if they think I'm crazy, no matter if I lose everything." She took a step forward, leaving the safety of the wall where she had hidden among the staff. Her feet seemed to take forever to touch the floor, but she kept walking, crossing the edge of the elegant crowd. "I can't live with myself if I stay silent," she murmured, taking a deep breath. "Richard doesn't deserve to die like this. No one does." She took another step, then another, feeling some guests' eyes beginning to turn toward her with curiosity. A janitor moving during such a formal moment certainly seemed out of place. Richard started to lift his glass, preparing for the final toast that would also be his last conscious act. Maria could see that he was about to speak, about to say the words that would precede his death. She took the deepest breath of her life, feeling air fill her lungs as if it were the first time she'd ever breathed. Her hands stopped trembling, her vision sharpened, and an absolute determination settled in her soul. There was no turning back. No more time for doubts or fears. No more room for practical concerns about her own safety or financial future. Maria took one more step forward, positioning herself so her voice could be heard by everyone in the hall, and prepared for the words that would change her life forever. "Mr. Hamilton, please." Maria's voice cut through the elegant murmur of the crowd like a shout for help breaking the night. "Don't drink that wine." The silence that followed was deafening. 250 people turned as one, their faces ranging from surprise to outrage. Photographers lowered their cameras. The string quartet stopped playing, and even the subtle hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade away. Richard froze mid-movement. The crystal glass paused halfway to his lips. His eyebrows furrowed in genuine confusion as his eyes met Maria's across the sea of hostile faces. For a moment, he looked like a statue, an elegant man captured in amber, eternally suspended between life and death. "Maria!" Richard's voice was low, uncertain, filled with a perplexity that echoed through the silent hall. What are you doing?" But before Maria could answer, a wave of whispers began to rise around her like an incoming tide. Voices blended into a growing chorus of disapproval and discomfort. "What on earth is going on here?" murmured a gray-haired man, his voice thick with aristocratic indignation. "She's the cleaning lady," whispered a woman wearing a pearl necklace worth more than Maria's yearly salary. "Apparently, she's lost her mind." "This is absolutely unacceptable," declared another guest, his voice rising. "How dare someone interrupt such a special moment?" Maria could feel the weight of 250 pairs of eyes on her, each filled with judgment and disdain. She stood in the center of the most elegant ballroom she had ever seen, her simple work clothes brutally contrasting with the gowns and tuxedos around her. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to keep eye contact with Richard. "Mr. Hamilton," she said, her voice gaining strength despite her fear. "Please trust me. Don't drink that wine." "There's something terrible." "My God," interrupted Eleanor Blackwood, the real estate mogul's wife, her sharp voice cutting through Maria's words. "She's clearly having some kind of mental breakdown. Someone needs to call security." "This is embarrassing," muttered Senator Bradford, shaking his head disapprovingly. How was this situation even allowed? Maria saw faces around her twist into expressions of disgust and impatience. Some guests began to laugh, a cruel sound that echoed through the room like breaking glass. She noticed people pulling out phones, some probably to record the embarrassing scene she was causing. "Look at her," whispered a young socialite to her companion. "She's totally hysterical. Probably drank something from the kitchen." "Poor thing," replied the other with fake sympathy. "Must be the stress of working for important people. Some just can't handle the pressure." Victoria Sterling, an imposing woman in her early 50s with perfectly styled platinum hair, moved through the crowd with the grace and authority of someone used to handling problems. Her presence commanded immediate respect. She was not only Richard's closest business partner, but also one of the most powerful women in the city. "Maria," Victoria said, her voice carrying a firm maternal authority. "You need to calm down. You're clearly upset, and this is not the appropriate place for—" "No," Maria interrupted, her own boldness in contradicting Victoria making several guests gasp audibly. "You don't understand. Someone wants to harm Mr. Hamilton. I heard it. I heard someone talking about—" "This is ridiculous," Victoria said, reaching out a firm hand to grab Maria's arm. "You're obviously having some kind of episode. Let's handle this discreetly, away from the guests." Maria felt Victoria's fingers close around her arm, trying to pull her away from the center of the ballroom. Around her, the crowd grew restless, some guests clearly eager to end this awkward moment and return to the celebration. "Really, Richard?" said a distinguished man with a British accent. "You should have more control over your staff. This is completely unacceptable. Maybe it's time to review your hiring procedures." suggested a woman in a red lace dress. Clearly, some psychological screening is in order. Richard remained motionless, his glass still suspended, his eyes locked on Maria's face with an intensity she had never seen before. There was something in his expression that made her think. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't dismissing her words entirely. "Please," Maria pleaded, gently struggling against Victoria's grip. "Mr. Hamilton, I've worked in this house for 3 years. You know me. I would never do something like this without a reason. Please, just listen." "That's enough," Victoria said firmly, her voice carrying an authority that made several guests nod in approval. "Richard, I'll handle this situation. You should continue with the toast. Your guests are waiting." "Yes, let's move on," agreed a voice from the crowd. "Let's not let this ruin such a special moment." "Absolutely," said another. "This disruption has gone far enough." Maria could feel the tide of opinion turning even more against her. Every second that passed, every word she spoke, only cemented the impression that she was having a mental breakdown. She could see from the faces around her that her credibility was being destroyed in real time. "You're embarrassing yourself," Victoria whispered in her ear, trying to sound kind but keeping her grip firm. "And you're embarrassing Richard. Let me help you leave discreetly before this gets worse." "No," Maria said, her voice rising in desperation. "You don't understand. I heard someone on the phone. They said that when Mr. Hamilton raised the glass for the toast, it would look like a heart attack. They said it would seem completely natural." The crowd erupted in even louder murmurs, some guests openly laughing now. Maria caught fragments of conversations. "She's clearly delusional. Crazy conspiracy theories. Someone needs to call a doctor. This is what happens when you don't screen your help properly." Victoria's grip tightened on Maria's arm, her patience clearly wearing thin. "That's enough," she said, her voice sharp. Several guests nodded approvingly. "Richard, I'm going to have security escort her out. This has gone far beyond inappropriate." "Please." Maria's voice cracked with desperation as she felt herself being pulled away from Richard. Just don't drink it yet. Give me 5 minutes to explain." 5 minutes. The crowd grew more agitated, some guests openly complaining about the disruption. Maria saw security personnel moving through the crowd, their presence adding a threatening weight to the situation. "This is absolutely unacceptable," declared a man in an expensive tuxedo. "How dare she make such accusations at a charity event? Someone clearly has serious mental health issues," added a woman wearing diamond earrings that sparkled like stars. "This is exactly why background checks are so important." Richard stayed still, his wine glass still paused halfway to his lips. But Maria saw something in his eyes. Not just confusion or embarrassment, but a flicker of something else. Uncertainty? Concern? She couldn't tell, but it gave her a desperate sliver of hope. "Mr. Hamilton?" she pleaded, her voice rising over the hostile murmur of the crowd. "I would never, ever do something like this without a reason. You know me. You know I'm not crazy. Please, please trust me for 1 minute." The tension in the room was palpable. Nearly 300 people caught between embarrassment, curiosity, and growing irritation. The beautiful evening, carefully planned, was crumbling before their eyes, and Maria felt the weight of their collective displeasure pressing down on her like a physical force. Victoria Sterling's voice cut through the chaos with practiced authority. "Security, please escort this woman out immediately. And Richard, please continue with your toast. Don't let this unfortunate incident ruin what should be a perfect evening." The crowd murmured agreement, a sea of elegant faces nodding as security moved closer. Maria felt her last chance slipping away, the hostile energy in the room building to a crescendo that threatened to sweep her away completely. But Richard still hadn't moved. His glass remained suspended, his eyes still fixed on Maria with that same intense, unreadable expression. In that moment, with the crowd closing in and time running out, everything hung in the balance. "I overheard a conversation," Maria said, her voice breaking but growing stronger as she resisted Victoria's grip on her arm. Someone talking on the phone about poisoning the wine. They said when you raise your glass for the toast, it would look like a natural heart attack. The burst of laughter that followed was cruel and sharp. The sound echoed through the hall like shattering glass, each laugh a stab at Maria's credibility. She saw faces around her twisted into expressions of malicious amusement, as if she were an unintentional clown in a grotesque show. "Poison!" Eleanor Blackwood exclaimed, her words cut off by peals of laughter. "She thinks someone wants to poison Richard. Like in the movies. My God." Another woman said, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. "She really believes her own fantasies. Poor thing." "This is what happens," Senator Bradford declared, his voice dripping with condescension. "When people watch too many crime shows, they start seeing murderers everywhere." Maria felt each word like a slap. She could see she was losing any chance of being believed, but something inside her, a strength she didn't know she had, kept her from backing down. Her feet planted firmly on the marble floor, she squared her shoulders against the crowd's pressure. "I'm not crazy," she said, her voice rising with determination. "I know how this sounds, but I swear on my daughter's life that I heard that conversation. Someone in this room wants to harm you, Mr. Hamilton." Victoria Sterling's grip on Maria's arm tightened painfully, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the fabric of Maria's uniform. "That's enough," Victoria hissed, her voice steel-edged, making several guests step back. "Richard, this woman is clearly having a complete psychological breakdown. She needs professional help, not an audience." "Look at her," sneered a man in a navy blue tuxedo. "She's shaking, she's incoherent. Classic signs of a mental episode." "Has anyone checked if she's been drinking?" suggested a woman wearing emerald earrings. "Staff sometimes get into the alcohol at events like this." Maria felt tears of frustration burn in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She knew crying would only confirm their judgment that she was unstable. Instead, she forced herself to look directly at Richard, pouring every ounce of sincerity into her voice. "Mr. Hamilton," she said, cutting through the crowd's murmur, 3 years ago, when my daughter Sophia was 7, she had pneumonia. You remember? You asked about her every day until she got better. You even sent flowers to the hospital." Richard's expression flickered barely perceptibly, a flash of recognition crossing his face. 2 years ago, when my uniform was wearing out and I was too proud to ask for help, you quietly increased my Christmas bonus. You never mentioned it, but I knew." Maria's voice grew stronger, more confident. "Last year, when I was worried about Sophia's school district, you personally called Superintendent Williams to ask about transfer procedures." Victoria's face hardened. "This is emotional manipulation," she said coldly. "She's using Richard's kindness against him. It's a classic manipulation tactic." "Yes," agreed a distinguished older man. "She's clearly unstable, and now she's trying to exploit Richard's good nature." "I would call this harassment," added a woman in a silver-beaded dress. "She's causing a scene and making wild accusations. This is completely unacceptable." Maria could feel the crowd's energy shift from amusement to genuine anger. She was no longer just entertainment. She was a threat to their comfortable evening, an unwelcome disruption that had to be removed. "Security," Victoria called out, her voice clear and commanding across the room. "Please remove this woman immediately. She's clearly having a breakdown and disturbing our guests." Maria saw 3 security guards pushing through the crowd, faces neutral but intentions clear. She had maybe 30 seconds before they would physically remove her, ending any chance of saving Richard's life. "You all think I'm crazy," Maria said, raising her voice above the crowd's murmur. "You see a cleaning lady who's lost her mind. But I've worked in this house for 3 years. I've seen Mr. Hamilton's kindness, his generosity, his genuine care for people. Do you really think I would risk my job, my reputation, my family's security unless I believed with every fiber of my being that his life was in danger?" "Yes," Victoria said flatly. "Mental illness makes people do irrational things. That's exactly what we're seeing here. She's clearly delusional, added another voice from the crowd. Poor thing probably needs medication. This is getting uncomfortable, complained a woman near the back. Can't we just have her removed so we can continue with the evening? The security guards were closer now, their presence adding weight to the hostile energy filling the room. Maria saw in their eyes that they viewed her as a problem to be solved, not a person to listen to. Mr. Hamilton, Maria said, desperation breaking her voice. I know you're a good man. I know you care about truth and justice. That's why you donate to charities. Why you help people like me. Please just trust me enough to put down that glass. Just for a moment. She saw the internal struggle on Richard's face. His eyes flicked between her genuine terror and Victoria's commanding certainty. The hand holding the wine glass trembled slightly, the first sign of doubt he'd shown. Richard, Victoria said, her voice heavy with years of friendship and business partnership. I've known you for 15 years. I've been your partner, your friend, your confidant. This woman is clearly disturbed. Don't let her manipulate you with emotional appeals. She's right, agreed a man who seemed to be another business associate. Victoria has your best interests at heart. This person is clearly unstable. Just have her removed, someone called out from the crowd. We didn't come here to watch a psychiatric episode. Maria felt the tears she had held back finally spill over. Not from sadness, but from the crushing weight of being utterly alone in a room full of people who saw her as less than human. She was fighting for a man's life, and they only saw an inconvenience to be eliminated. I have nothing to gain from this, she said, voice thick with emotion. Nothing. I will lose my job. My daughter and I will lose our home. My reputation will be destroyed. But if you die, Mr. Hamilton, I'll never forgive myself. I'll live with that guilt forever. The security guards were close enough now that Maria could see their faces clearly. Professional, impatient, ready to escort her out as quietly as possible. Please, Victoria said to the guards, voice carrying aristocratic authority. Remove her quickly and discreetly. This has gone on long enough. Richard's wine glass trembled in his hand, the golden liquid catching the light from the chandeliers. The whole room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his decision. Maria saw the war playing out in his eyes. Years of trust in Victoria battling against the desperate sincerity in Maria's gaze. I swear on my daughter's life, Maria said, voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying throughout the room. I swear on everything I hold sacred. Someone in this room wants you dead, and they're counting on everyone thinking I'm crazy. The security guards reached for Maria's arms, but she didn't resist. She kept her eyes locked on Richard's, pouring every ounce of conviction into that gaze. The choice is yours, Mr. Hamilton, she said quietly. But please don't let the last thing you do be prove that a cleaning lady was right and everyone else was wrong. The room fell into absolute silence. Even the ambient sounds of the building seemed to fade away, leaving only the weight of Richard's decision hanging in the air like a sword about to fall. The entire hall seemed frozen in time, as if 250 people were trapped in amber. Richard looked at Maria for a long moment, his eyes scanning her face, the tears she could no longer hold back, the trembling in her hands, but above all, the unwavering determination shining through her despair. Slowly, very slowly, Richard lowered his wine glass. The sound of crystal striking the marble table echoed through the hall like a gunshot, breaking the spell that had kept everyone motionless. Murmurs of surprise and outrage began to swell around the room. Richard! Victoria exclaimed, her voice heavy with disbelief and something close to panic. You can't be serious. Explain, Richard said to Maria, his voice low but firm. Tell me exactly what you heard. Maria felt a deep relief that nearly made her knees buckle. She wiped the tears from her face with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself enough to speak clearly. I was cleaning the second-floor office, she began, her voice gaining strength. It was around 7:30 p.m. when I heard someone talking on the phone. The door was ajar, so at first, I didn't think anything was strange. That's ridiculous, Victoria interrupted. But her voice had lost some of its earlier authority. Richard, she's clearly making this up. Let her finish, Richard said, his voice carrying an authority that made Victoria take a step back. Maria took a deep breath, forcing herself to remember every detail. The person said, "The wine will be served at 8:15. When he raises the glass for the toast, it will look completely natural, like a heart attack. No one will ever suspect." A heavy silence fell over the hall. Maria could hear her own breathing, the distant hum of the air conditioning, the barely audible sound of expensive fabrics brushing against each other as people shifted uneasily. She also said, Maria continued, her voice growing steadier, that the life insurance money would solve all the financial problems, and that the new clause in the will would ensure everything went smoothly. Richard's face had gone pale, his eyes widening as the implications of Maria's words sank in. Maria could see the wheels turning in his mind, connections forming that he hadn't wanted to consider. "Richard," Victoria said, her voice becoming pleading, "you can't possibly believe this. This woman is clearly having some kind of breakdown. She probably heard fragments of conversation and made up this elaborate story." But Richard wasn't looking at Victoria anymore. His eyes were fixed on Maria, and she could see horror dawning on his face. "The wine," he said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Victoria, you specifically insisted on this particular vintage tonight. You said it was perfect for the occasion." "Of course I did," Victoria replied, but there was now a slight tremor in her voice. "I wanted everything to be perfect for your charity event. That's what friends do. And last month," Richard continued, his voice growing stronger, "you suggested I update my will. You said it would be good to have clear beneficiaries for my business partners." The crowd was now listening intently, their earlier mockery replaced by growing unease. Maria could see faces shifting from Victoria to Richard and back again, like spectators watching a high-stakes tennis match. "Richard, you're being paranoid," Victoria said, but her composure was starting to crack. "I've been your friend for 15 years. I helped build your business. How could you possibly think—" "The financial troubles," Richard said, his voice gathering momentum like a speeding train. "I've heard rumors. Your real estate investments, the problems with the Patterson deal. People have been talking." Victoria's face flushed red. "Business ups and downs are normal," she said, but her voice was too loud, too defensive. "Everyone goes through rough patches. That doesn't mean—" "Test the wine?" Richard said suddenly, his voice cutting through Victoria's protests like a knife. The suggestion hit the room like a physical blow. Several people gasped audibly, and Maria could see security guards exchanging uncertain glances, unsure how to proceed. "Richard, this is insane," Victoria said, her voice rising toward hysteria. "You're going to humiliate yourself and ruin your reputation over the ramblings of a mentally unstable cleaning woman?" "If the wine is clean," Richard said, his voice deadly calm, "then Maria will be proven wrong, and I'll handle the consequences. But if it's not—" He let the threat hang in the air. Maria watched as Victoria's carefully built facade began to crumble. The woman who had ruled the room with aristocratic authority just minutes ago was now fidgeting with her jewelry, eyes darting around like a trapped animal seeking escape. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You're destroying years of friendship over the word of someone clearly having a psychotic break. Then you won't mind if we test it," Richard said, his eyes never leaving Victoria's face. The crowd had gone completely silent now, everyone focused on the drama unfolding before them. Maria could feel the energy in the room shifting, the earlier hostility toward her turning into something else. Curiosity, fear, and a growing sense they were witnessing something far more serious than a misunderstanding. "Dr. Patterson," Richard called out, his voice carrying across the room. "You're here tonight, aren't you?" An elderly man with silver hair stepped forward from the crowd, his face grave. "I'm here, Richard. What do you need? You still have contacts at the hospital lab, don't you? Could you have this wine tested quickly?" Dr. Patterson nodded slowly. "I could make a call. They could run a basic toxicology screen within the hour." Victoria's face had gone white, all the color drained from her cheeks. "Richard, please," she said, her voice desperate now. Think about what you're doing. Think about our friendship, our business partnership. Don't let this woman destroy everything we've built together." But Richard was already reaching for his phone. "I'm calling Detective Morrison," he said. "This needs to be handled properly." "No!" Victoria shouted, the word exploding from her lips so forcefully several guests jumped. "You can't. You don't understand." The mask had finally slipped completely. Victoria Sterling, the composed businesswoman who had commanded respect just moments before, was now trembling visibly, her hands shaking as she realized her carefully crafted plan was unraveling. Maria watched in fascinated horror as the truth began to dawn on everyone present. The elegantly dressed guests who had mocked her minutes ago were now staring at Victoria with suspicion and fear. The woman they trusted, the anchor of their social circle, was revealing herself to be something far more dangerous. "Victoria?" Richard said, his voice heavy with betrayal and sadness. "Tell me Maria is wrong. Tell me you didn't try to poison me." Victoria's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Her eyes darted around the room, seeking escape, allies, anything that might save her from the tightening net. The silence stretched out like a held breath. Maria realized everyone in the room was waiting for Victoria's response, an answer that would either clear a desperate cleaning woman or reveal that one of their most trusted peers was capable of murder. Dr. Patterson returned to the ballroom less than an hour later, his somber expression confirming everyone's worst fears. The nervous murmuring of the crowd stopped instantly as he approached Richard, holding a small vial with a sample of the golden wine that had nearly sealed a man's fate. "Richard," Dr. Patterson said, his voice heavy with the gravity of the situation. "The lab found a lethal concentration of digitalis in the wine, enough to cause a massive heart attack that would look completely natural." The room erupted in shocked and horrified exclamations. Maria felt her legs tremble, not from fear this time, but from a relief so deep she could barely stand. She had saved Richard Hamilton's life. She had found the courage to speak out when everyone else was blinded by appearances of respectability. "My God," Eleanor Blackwood whispered, her hand flying to cover her mouth. She was right. The cleaning lady was right all along. Victoria Sterling stood in the center of the ballroom like a cracked marble statue, her face pale as paper, her eyes glazed with panic. She seemed to shrink physically, as if the weight of the truth was crushing her. "Richard," she said, her voice coming out as a desperate whisper. "You don't understand. I was desperate. The investments failed, the debts were piling up. I lost everything." "So you decided to kill me?" Richard asked, his voice heavy with a mix of betrayal and deep disbelief. 15 years of friendship, of partnership, and you chose murder? It wasn't supposed to be like this," Victoria shouted, her words echoing through the ornate room. "It was supposed to be quick, painless. You wouldn't suffer. And I would save my company, my reputation, my future." Richard's office security cameras were quickly reviewed. There was Victoria, clearly visible, making the phone call Maria had overheard. Her voice, captured on the audio system, repeated exactly the words Maria had reported. "The wine will be served at 8:15. When he raises the glass for the toast, it will seem completely natural, like a heart attack." "I trusted you," Richard said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I included you in my will because I believed you were my friend. You used my trust to plan my death." Victoria collapsed into a nearby chair, her elegant silk dress stained with tears she could no longer hold back. "I didn't want this," she sobbed. "But I saw no other way. The debts, the creditors, they were going to take everything. My reputation, my company, my life, everything was ending. So you decided to end mine," Richard replied, his voice cold as ice. The sound of sirens began to echo through the night, growing louder as they approached the mansion. Maria could hear the heavy crunch of tires on the gravel driveway, car doors slamming, quick footsteps closing in. "Police!" a firm voice announced as officers entered the ballroom. "Did someone call about an attempted poisoning?" Detective Morrison, a sturdy man in his early 50s with graying hair, scanned the room with seasoned eyes, instantly recognizing the tension in the air. His gaze settled on Victoria, who was curled up in the chair, clearly in emotional collapse. "She confessed," Richard said, pointing at Victoria. "Right in front of everyone. She put digitalis in my wine, planning to kill me so she could inherit my fortune."
No.
Victoria screamed, standing up abruptly. "I didn't want it to be this way. I'm not a murderer. I'm a respectable businesswoman. I contribute to charities. You're a murder suspect?" Detective Morrison said firmly, signaling the other officers. "Victoria Sterling, you're under arrest for attempted premeditated homicide." The sound of handcuffs clicking around Victoria's wrists echoed in the room like a judge's gavel. The cold metal against her skin seemed to finally make the reality of the situation sink in. 15 years, Victoria murmured as she was led toward the exit. 15 years of friendship, and you're going to destroy me because of a cleaning lady. No, Richard said, his voice clear and steady. You destroyed yourself because of your own greed. Maria just had the courage to speak the truth. As Victoria was escorted through the ballroom, passing faces that had admired and respected her only hours before, Maria saw a complete transformation in the expressions around her. The same guests who had mocked and called her crazy now looked at her with a mix of shame, admiration, and gratitude. "Miss," Senator Bradford said, approaching Maria with hesitant steps, I need to apologize. We all owe you an apology. You saved Richard's life, and we treated you terribly. You were brave," Eleanor Blackwood added, her jewels sparkling under the chandelier lights as she approached. "Braver than any of us." Maria looked around the room, seeing faces that had been cruel and scornful now marked by guilt and respect. It was a surreal transformation. In just a few hours, she had gone from being seen as a crazy person to being recognized as a hero. "I just did what any decent person would do," Maria said softly, her voice still trembling with the adrenaline of the events. "I couldn't let someone die when I knew I could stop it." Richard came up to her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Maria, you didn't just save my life. You showed me who my true friends are. And you taught me that real courage doesn't come from position or wealth. It comes from the heart." Through the large ballroom windows, Maria could see the red and blue lights of police cars reflecting in the night, taking Victoria Sterling away from the privileged life she had known. A woman who had had everything, wealth, influence, respect, had lost it all because she chose greed over loyalty and human decency. "Mom always said," Maria murmured, more to herself than anyone else, "that truth has its own power. Sometimes it takes a while to come out, but it always does." The ballroom, which had started the night as a setting for elegant celebration, now carried the weight of a dark lesson about human nature. The guests began to slowly disperse, their conversations lowered to murmurs reflecting the shock and reflection the events had caused. Maria stayed in the center of the room, still wearing her work uniform, still carrying the weight of what had happened. She had entered that night as a simple employee, invisible to most of the people present. She was leaving as someone who had changed the course of history, a woman who had found her voice when it mattered most and had used that voice to save a life. Justice had been served, but Maria knew the real victory was not in Victoria Sterling's arrest. It was in the fact that she had found the courage to speak out when everyone else chose silence, proving that sometimes the most unlikely people are capable of the most heroic acts. The television cameras arrived like vultures, their bright lights turning the elegant ballroom into a news set. Reporters crowded outside the mansion, their voices echoing through the night as they covered the assassination attempt that had shocked Manhattan's high society. Richard Hamilton stood in the center of the room, surrounded by guests who had witnessed the extraordinary events of the evening. His face was pale, but his posture was upright and dignified. He had requested that the cameras be allowed inside. There was something he needed to say, something the whole world needed to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his voice carrying an authority that commanded immediate silence. "Tonight, we all witnessed an attempted murder that was thwarted by the extraordinary courage of one person." Maria stood beside him, still wearing her work uniform, still trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. She could feel everyone's eyes on her, the same eyes that had once looked at her with disdain now shining with something completely different. "I want all of you to see this woman," Richard continued, gesturing toward Maria. "Her name is Maria Santos. She has worked as a housekeeper in my home for 3 years. And tonight, she saved my life." Tears began to form in Richard's eyes as he spoke. "When Maria tried to warn me about the danger, all of us, including myself, treated her as if she were invisible. We mocked her, humiliated her, called her crazy. But she persisted. She risked her job, her reputation, her dignity to save the life of a man who barely knew her." The room fell into complete silence, every word from Richard echoing against the ornate walls. Maria could hear her own breathing and the distant sounds of cameras capturing every moment. "She was invisible to all of you," Richard said, his voice breaking with emotion. "But today, she is my hero." The crowd erupted in applause. Not the polite clapping of high society, but something deeper, something genuine. Maria saw faces that had been cruel now shining with tears of shame and admiration. "Maria," Richard said, turning to her, "you didn't just save my life. You taught me a lesson about the value of every person, about the courage that can exist in the most unexpected places." He paused, wiping the tears from his eyes. "Therefore, I am announcing that Maria will be promoted to head of the household staff at my home, with a substantial raise. More importantly, I am establishing a scholarship fund in her name, so her daughter Sophia can pursue her dream of studying medicine." Maria felt her knees weaken. The world around her started to spin as Richard's words sank in. Medicine for Sophia. Her daughter could study medicine. The dream that had seemed impossible just hours before was now becoming reality. "Mr. Hamilton?" Maria whispered, her voice nearly inaudible. I can't accept this." "You can and you will accept it," Richard said firmly. "It's the least I can do for the woman who gave me a second chance at life." Richard stepped closer, and in front of all the elegant guests, the television cameras, the reporters and onlookers, he wrapped Maria in a warm embrace. Maria felt all her defenses crumble as tears of gratitude, relief, and joy streamed down her face. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "Thank you for giving me the chance to speak. Thank you for believing in me." "Thank you," Richard replied, his own voice choked with emotion, "for reminding me that true nobility doesn't come from titles or wealth, but from character and courage." The applause continued for several minutes. Maria could see faces that had once been hostile now marked by genuine shame and respect. Eleanor Blackwood was openly crying, her jewels sparkling under the lights as she applauded. Senator Bradford nodded in silent approval, his eyes reflecting a new understanding. May I use your phone?" Maria asked Richard, her hands trembling with emotion. "I need to call my daughter." "Of course," Richard said, guiding her to a more private corner of the room. "Use my office. Take all the time you need." Maria trembled as she dialed the familiar number, her fingers barely hitting the buttons. The phone rang once, twice, then Sophia's sweet voice echoed through the line. "Mom, are you okay? You sound different." "Sophia, my dear," Maria said, her voice full of joyful tears. "I have news for you, news that will change our lives." "What happened, Mom? You're scaring me." "You will be able to study medicine, Sophia. Your dreams, your hopes. All of it is coming true." The silence on the other end was broken by a sob of disbelief. "Mom, what are you saying? How is this possible?" "I saved someone's life today," Maria said, her voice growing stronger and more determined. "And he's giving back by helping you chase your dreams. You're going to be a doctor, Sophia. You can do it." Sophia's sobs over the phone were pure joy. Maria could picture her in their small apartment, covering her face with her hands as she absorbed the impossible news. "I love you, Mom," Sophia whispered. "I always knew you were special. Now the whole world knows it too." When Maria hung up, she found Richard waiting patiently outside the office. His eyes were thoughtful, as if he were processing something profound. "You know," he said softly, "I thought I knew all the important things about my life. my business, my friends, my social standing. But today I found out the most important person in my life was someone I barely noticed. Mr. Hamilton, Maria began, but he raised his hand to stop her. No, he said, no thanks necessary. You've given me something far more valuable than I can give you. You've given me perspective on what truly matters. They stood silently for a moment, two people from completely different worlds, united by a moment of courage that had changed both their lives forever. Every person has value, Richard said, more to himself than to Maria. Every person has a story, dreams, something important to contribute. And sometimes, the people we consider least important are the ones who save us when we need it most. Maria looked out the window at the starry night, thinking of Sophia, of her mother who had died dreaming of a better future, of all the people like her who worked tirelessly behind the scenes in other people's lives. My mother used to say, Maria said softly, that God sometimes uses the most unlikely people to do his work. She said heroism isn't about being strong or important. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. Your mother was a wise woman, Richard replied, and she raised an extraordinary daughter. As they returned to the ballroom, where guests were still quietly discussing the night's events, Maria reflected on the incredible journey she had lived. She had started the day as a simple housekeeper, invisible to most people around her. She was ending it as a hero, a woman who had found her voice when it mattered most. The story would spread through newspapers, television, and social media. But for Maria, the true victory wasn't the public attention, or even the secure future now promised. It was the fact that she had proven, to herself and to the world, that every person has worth, every voice deserves to be heard, and sometimes the greatest heroism comes from the most unexpected places. The night ended with a profound lesson about human nature. That true greatness is not found in titles or wealth, but in the courage to do what's right, even when the whole world is against you. And the people we consider invisible can be exactly the ones who save us when we need it most.
If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. These other stories will also move you. Click to keep watching.